When you think about, what images come to your mind? Fire? Eternal pain?
Ouch!
Listening to Nickelback? Are we sure? Let's explore together what the Bible actually says about H-E, double hockey sticks.
Last week, we started a journey exploring the topic of hell. The purpose of this series is to take a deeper look at what, for some, can be a very troubling and even frightening thing. I get that. As I shared last week, I have my own religious trauma tied to this subject. So a key purpose of our journey together is to help ease some of your fears around all of this. After all, we worship a God who loves us more than words can say, and our faith was never meant to be driven by fear. And while there are some passages in Scripture that talk about a place of eternal punishment, once you dig into those teachings, things get confusing and overwhelming pretty quickly. My hope is that by unpacking what Scripture does and does not say about hell, you can gain the knowledge you need to understand this topic in a way that honors what's in the Bible without creating unnecessary fear and worry. Our topic for today is, what in the hell? Our conversation is going to focus on what hell is according to Scripture. More specifically, we're going to look at the 4 words that are most often translated as hell in English translations of the Bible. The first thing we must keep in mind as we do this is that the word hell is not found anywhere in the Bible. It's actually an Old English word used to describe the netherworld of the dead. And as best I can tell, in its original form, the word hell had no specific connection to Jewish or Christian beliefs, but instead reflected Anglo-Saxon pagan beliefs. Whenever you see the word hell in Scripture, it is standing in the place of one of these 4 words: Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, and Gehenna. There may be an exception to this somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So if we want to understand what hell really is according to Scripture, we have to understand these words and how they are used. We find only one of these 4 words in the Old Testament, and that is Sheol. Occurring 65 times, it is most accurately translated as a pit or a grave. It is also understood to be an unknown place of the dead. It's important to know that according to the Old Testament, both good and bad people go to Sheol. Did you get that? It is a place where both the wicked and the righteous can be found. In that regard, it has very little to do with the ideas of hell many Christians have in mind today. In some English translations of the Old Testament, the word Sheol is left untranslated. It just shows up as is. In others, it is translated as pit or grave. But in some Bibles, you find something really interesting and also more than just a little bit concerning. Take the King James Bible, for instance. Now, I know that some people really like the King James Bible, and there are times the language in it is beautiful. That said, from a translation perspective, it's not all that accurate, and it takes a lot of liberties with the text. That is certainly true when it comes to the concept of hell. I'm going to show you 4 passages from the King James Bible. The word Sheol is found in each of them. But I want you to notice how the word is translated into English. The wicked shall be turned to hell. What man is he that liveth and shall not see death? Shall he deliver his soul from the hand of the grave? Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell. For wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave, that thou wouldest keep me secret until thy wrath be past. Did you catch it? When talking about the wicked, the translators use the word hell. When talking about the righteous, they used grave. While this is not a universal pattern of translation in the King James, it is more than just a coincidence. The reason for the difference? Editorial choice. They chose which word to use, and many people believe their choice was driven by an agenda to enhance the notion of hell as a place of punishment for the wicked. While this is a particularly egregious example, this kind of thing is not uncommon. Whenever we read the Bible in English, there are going to be translation issues. Some Bibles are more accurate than others, and a few of them are quite good. But keep in mind that even the best among them is subject to the translator's understanding of the original language. And despite best intentions, theological bias can play a role in the translation process. Don't get me wrong. For the most part, our English Bibles are pretty accurate. But when studying Scripture, it is a good idea to read more than one version and to make sure you check the footnotes. While not perfect, I recommend the New Revised Standard Version as a good Bible to have on hand. It's what we use here at Middletown Christian Church, and it's really reliable. Beyond the word Sheol, which generally means a pit, grave, or place of the dead, both righteous and unrighteous, the Old Testament has very little else to say about the topic of hell or eternal punishment. Yes, there are passages of warning and judgment, but these are primarily tied to the nation of Israel instead of some kind of individual salvation or eternal punishment. Okay, let's turn our attention to the New Testament. In the New Testament, there are 3 words often translated as hell in modern English Bibles. Hades is the Greek version of Sheol. And like Sheol, it is sometimes translated as hell, but you will also see it translated as pit, grave, or death, which is a much more accurate translation of what that word really means, as we've already talked about. Another word often translated as hell in the New Testament is Tartarus. This word is used only once and appears to be a temporary confinement for certain demons until their final judgment. The most common word that is translated as hell in the New Testament is Gehenna. With the exception of a passage in James, every use of the word Gehenna comes from Jesus. While Gehenna is used in ways that seem to point toward a place of eternal torment, it is important to note that Gehenna was a very real place. The word itself comes from the Hebrew word Gehenna, which means the canyon or valley of Hinnom. This valley was located outside of the southwest wall of Jerusalem. Here is a modern-day picture of that location. The Valley of Hinnom is referred to several times in the Old Testament. Here's an example from Jeremiah chapter 7. And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. The valley of Hinnom was a place where the unspeakable happened, as children were burned in sacrifice to a god named Molech. As the years passed, a sense of foreboding rightfully hung over the valley. People eventually began to burn their garbage and waste there, using sulfur, which is why descriptions of Gehenna, as well as some descriptions of hell, include the presence of sulfur in them. Eventually, the Hebrew name Gehenna, Canyon of Hinnom, evolved into Gehenna, which is usually translated in English Bibles as hell. So, when we come across passages where Jesus uses the word hell, he was actually saying Gehenna, and you will see that reflected in most footnotes. This is important because it shapes how we understand Jesus' use of the word. When Jesus spoke about Gehenna, people knew what he was talking about. They knew it was a horrible place where unspeakable things happened. It was a place in which no one would want to find themselves. But while it was a terrible place, Jesus was not using that word in the way most Christians understand the word hell today. It carried a much more specific meaning. So when you see the word hell in Scripture, it is coming from one of these four words, each with a very specific meaning. Sheol, a pit, grave, or realm of the dead for both righteous and unrighteous people. Hades, the Greek version of Sheol. Tartarus, a deep pit reserved for cast out angels. Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom, a place where children were burned in sacrifice. Somewhere along the line, a lot of English translators decided, for better or worse, to conflate these four words into one. And in so doing, they have shaped most Christians' understanding of hell in ways that don't reflect what is found in Scripture. And even if some biblical translations are more nuanced, some religious leaders often don't take the time to describe those nuances, which has led to a great deal of misunderstanding about what hell is and what it isn't. Now, I do want to be clear about something. While the word hell does not appear in Scripture, and while the words often translated as hell bear little resemblance to the way most Christians understand the word, there are some passages in the Bible that use other language to talk about a place of punishment for the unrighteous. Take a look at this list of descriptions found in Scripture for this place of punishment. A lake of fire, outer darkness, a place of gnashing of teeth, a separation from God, a deepest darkness, a place of weeping, a place of annihilation. While the words may not be mentioned, while the word hell may not be mentioned, these all pretty much sound like hell to me. Of course, there is a lot of debate about how we are meant to interpret those descriptions and what it means in terms of a person's eternal fate. We will get into some of that stuff in the weeks to come. But before we dove into all of that, we needed to start with the basics of what hell is and is not, based on the words that are actually found in Scripture. I hope our time today has demonstrated the importance of that. As with most things in Scripture, this is a very rich and deep topic that is best understood in its fullness, which can sometimes be a bit complicated. Sure, it's a lot simpler to say that hell is a lake of fire where the unsaved are eternally tormented. But the reality is that what Scripture says is much, much more complicated than that. And if the devil really is in the details, we need to pay attention to them. Our topic for next week is, why in the hell? If hell exists, then what is its true purpose? The answer might surprise you. So I hope to see you here. Amen.